Hey, Chris Lipe here. I'm talking about 3 huge misconceptions that people often have about singing, and how these misconceptions can seriously limit your potential as a singer. Because we get these lies in our heads, and we convince ourselves that there are things that are just so, and I can't really do anything about it. Now, there are certain things about our voices that are just so, but these misconceptions are not part of that group. And certainly buying into misconceptions does limit your voice. But nothing limits your voice more than the wrong approach to singing in the first place. And as I go through these misconceptions, keep in mind that if you don't have the foundation for understanding how your singing is supposed to feel from a fundamental support, from a fundamental breathing perspective, then it will be easier to buy into the lies. So if you're confident in the fact that you know what you're doing, when you're presented with or you're tempted to think in a certain way, you're going to be able to say, no, I got this. That's a lie. I'm going to continue to move forward confidently in my singing, in my music. If you want to develop this confidence based on true fundamental singing techniques, be sure to join my free vocal course linked in the video info below. Big misconception about singing number 1, the phrase, "This is just how I sound," or "That's just how they sound," and then stopping the thought process right there. Whenever we do this, we don't look for root cause. We don't look for influence. We don't dive deeper. We don't look beneath in someone else's voice or in our own voice to discover what could it do? What are the possibilities? And this really shows its ugly head when it comes to maybe a limitation that we have, or a way that we're thinking about our voice, or a particular tone that we hear, where we write it off as, oh, that's just my genetics, or that's just because I smoked, or that's because I did something stranger when I was little, or messed up my voice. And we assign causes without really looking beneath and being willing to experiment. So this misconception of "this is just how I sound," or "this is just how they sound," limits our ability to really discover what our voice can actually do. Here's an example. Well, that guy can hit that note because he's a high tenor and I'm a baritone. So that's just what he does, and that's just what I do. I can't hit that note. Don't say that. There's all sorts of ways to access notes, even as a baritone or bass, to access notes that those tenors access. And I bet you can hit it. It's going to sound different. It's going to feel different. It might be using a slightly different mechanism or a slightly different vocal positioning than they have to use because their vocal cords are different than yours. Their whole vocal tract is different than yours. But that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It's not that your voice is just this and their voice is just that. And you may not even be listening to or assigning the correct parameters while you're listening to their voice correctly. One big thing that really shook me early on was the idea that Chris Cornell is a baritone. And that was really freeing for me because I'd been told for a long time that I was a baritone as well. And when, you hear him singing all those notes up there, you're like, wow, I could never do that. I'm a baritone and he must be a tenor because he can hit those notes. No. And there's a lot of other baritones out there that can go really high. It's how you know how to use what you have that determines things like range, that determines things like stamina, that determines things like intensity, all of those things. So that's only one example. Here's another example. man, I don't have that breathy quality that other guy has. Well, my voice just is not that breathy. My voice is clearer. There might be a little truth to that in terms of every voice does sound different. Bruno Mars has this sort of naturally breathy sound that people, even when they try to imitate it incorrectly, aren't going to get, because that is part of what's built into his sound. But to just stop there and say, well, I'm not going to have a breathy quality to my voice. You see what I did there? I twisted my own way of thinking. That's just the way they sound. That's just the way I sound. I give up, right? That's the mentality that we don't want. Well, how could I develop breathiness in my voice? There's all sorts of ways to develop breathiness in your voice. Just like developing your range can be, in the last example, you can learn how to use your mixed voice and and blending your registers and use your head voice in a different way. With breathiness, there's all sorts of ways you can use compression. There's all sorts of ways that you can use airflow to create a healthy, breathy sound. So if we just give up by listening to someone who's breathy and say, this is just the way, that's such a cop-out and such a destructive and non-productive way of thinking. All right, big misconception number 2. My range tops out at note X. Don't go there. Don't ever go there. We sort of talked about it as an example in This Is Just How I Sound, right? And range as a function of sound. But we're talking about actual range, where a lot of vocalists feel over the years that they're limited. I've heard a lot of guys say, I can't get above a G4, for example. I can't get above an A4. And they have just resigned themselves to, well, that's just where my range, that's where I top out. And it's the wrong way of thinking. First of all, if you're a guy and you can't get above an A4 at all, you have not figured out how to properly use your head resonance. Any male should be able to get well above an A4 in head resonance. Now, you could also say, well, I can't get above A4 in my belt. I can't belt over an A4. Well, when you say that, what you're really admitting to is that you haven't figured out how to properly mix. Because you can belt any note in your head resonance and your chest resonance. You can blend those together and get full access to a very loud, aggressive note all the way across your range. So to mentally say, my range tops out at X, you are setting yourself up to top out at that note, as opposed to going deeper and looking at techniques and ways that you can go beyond that. For the longest time, I was that guy that said, I can't go above an A4. And I tried lots of things, and it wasn't until I figured out how to mix, how to use both resonances, my chest and my head, well, correctly, and efficiently with the right support, that I was able to take advantage of my whole range across both resonances and sing any note at any dynamic level with any amount of flavor or approach. Now, a lot of the things that I just talked about, being able to discover how to use your voice in this way so that you don't feel tapped out as far as range, I cover in my vocal course. So if you want to take this stuff deeper, be sure to click the link below and join my free vocal course. I've also done lots of other videos on my channel on how to start discovering some of this stuff. So be sure to check those out as well. Now, you might ask the question, well, Chris, does your range top out? I mean, isn't there a ceiling for you? Well, currently, I'm comfortable singing up to a certain note, and that is an F sharp 5, but I don't consider that to be a ceiling. I know that there are ways to get above that, well above that. And you listen to singers like Dimash, who has he has gone way higher than that, up in the 8 category in terms of octaves using whistle tones. Now, I haven't figured out how to put whistle tones in my voice and make use of those. I've gotten little glimpses here and there as I've experimented, but it's not usable yet. But I'm not taking the mindset that my voice ends at. I'm taking it as right now I'm comfortable singing in this particular range, which is right now up to a usable, up to a F sharp 5. But I am open to the fact that there are ways I can approach singing and feels that I can continue to explore that may expand. And I guarantee you, as I continue to practice and experiment, it will expand, because that's the mindset that I have. And that really is what this whole video is about, is learning to think correctly so that you free yourself up to discover things that you wouldn't otherwise discover. Okay, big misconception number 3. Singing aggressively is bad for your voice. Screaming will hurt your voice. Adding distortion and grit, and this is a misconception. But like all lies, there are truths that make you want to buy in to the whole thing, right? We see evidence of a lot of singers who sing aggressively and do it professionally who have screwed up their voice. And so we tend to have this mindset of, well, M. Shadow's jacked up his voice, and Oliver Sykes jacked up his voice, and man, Chris Cornell sounded a lot different in his later career than he did in his early career. It must not be good for you. And then, so we then take this approach that, well, if everybody's screwing up their voice that we like, and they sing aggressively, then singing aggressively must just be blanketly bad for your voice. And that's just not true. You look at other singers that don't scream or use distortion as a main part of their sound, like John Mayer or Adele. And both of those individuals have also had major vocal issues. So it's not about whether you're singing aggressively or not singing aggressively. There's a false correlation there. What it is about is, are you exercising balance when you're singing? And I'll unpack that a little bit more. And then the bigger question is, are you doing things correctly while recognizing the balance? There are right ways to go about getting aggressive sounds. This involves proper support and implementing that proper support. This involves placing the distortion in the right area of your vocal tract. This involves understanding your mixed voice and understanding your vocal break on a very introspective and deep level. All of these things will help you sing aggressively while not overdoing it very quickly. But a lot of times we listen to people and we read articles about them damaging their voice, and then we go, ugh, and we go, oh, that hurt. Okay, singing aggressively is bad for your voice. Shut it down. And then we don't go any further. But the truth is, and I've discovered this myself, if we know the right approaches and we practice those right approaches with balance, and then we apply those right approaches in moderation, we're fine. I can sing for hours and hours, high and aggressively. I can film 6 or 7 YouTube videos in a row that include aggressive vocals and be fine by the end of it. But I am being intensely introspective to how things feel the whole time, and I'm knowing when to say when. In performances or gigging or recording, planning how you're going to sing certain things in advance, knowing where those aggressive sections are, and knowing how much vocal energy you have for any given period of time is just as important as knowing the correct techniques and approaches to doing these things. I can be doing everything right and still overdo it. And that's a lot of what happens with touring artists, right? They're doing things right. They understand how to do things right, but they're touring and they're singing every night, or they're singing every other night, and they're not simply giving themselves the right amount of time to recover. So what ends up happening, and I'll use an exercise analogy. If I am lifting weights and I am doing bicep curls every day, I might be doing the exercise correctly. I might be taking in the right nutrition to develop healthy muscle mass and all that. But if I'm not giving my body a chance to rest and recover, and I'm not listening to my body while I'm doing the exercises correctly, I'm still not going to see the results that I want to see. In fact, I will see the opposite results and I could injure myself. It's the exact same way with singing in general, but especially during and with aggressive singing. We have to understand that it's a two-step thing. We have to understand how to do it, but we also have to understand the concept and apply the concept of moderation. And this moderation, if you're singing aggressively, you have less energy to sing as long. Whereas if you're singing cleanly and quietly and this style that doesn't have as much aggression, then you can sing longer. That's just the way it goes. Just like if you're lifting a heavier weight, you can't lift it up as many times as you can a lighter weight. That doesn't mean that lifting a heavy weight is bad, and that doesn't mean that singing aggressively is bad for your voice. It just means that we have to understand the budgeting and the moderation is different, and understand what that means for our own voice. I did another video a while back called 3 Singing Blunders, and it builds on some of what I've talked about in this video, while also showing you some experiential things that once you get your mind right, that a lot of people end up screwing up. So I encourage you to check out that video. And again, if you want to jump in to your own singing on a foundational level, make sure that you've got the tools you need to take your voice to a completely new level. Join my free vocal course linked below. We'll see you for more.